We're recording again for the State Library System, producing tapes for the archives in Frankfort for the Pogue Library of Oral History at Murray State University, and for the Marshall County Library, that copy paid for by WCBL Shelby McCallum owner. My name's Ray Mofield. Our guest for this tape is John Clay Lovett. John Clay is one of our noted citizens, son of the very eminent Judge Henry Lovett. And fortunately, before we formally started this program, Shelby, John Clay, recorded your father. And I'm certainly glad that he did. I'm sorry that we missed people like Luther Draffin and so on. It's good to have you, and we want to ask you, first of all, you were born in the county?
Yes, born right here in Benton.
And you are how old?
I'm 66.
Well, you're old enough, I guess, to be out of the boy class now, so we hope to milk your mind and anything that you might remember. Now, for the benefit of our genealogists, and we seem to have a lot of them these days, could you tell us anything about your your father was Judge Henry Lovett. Who was your mother?
My mother was Mamie Rudolph. She came from Sharp.
There are a lot of Rudolphs in the county, of course, and that name seems to maybe predominate in the Sharp area. Do you happen to remember the grandparents on either side?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Ray, I have traced the genealogy of the Lovett family, and I suppose that just about every Lovett in western Kentucky, and of course you know there are probably hundreds, maybe thousands of them scattered all over western Kentucky, I guess all of them could trace their ancestry to the same original source, and it goes back to the Revolutionary War. And I took the time to try to trace that genealogy from the earliest man whom we could identify. Finally chased it all the way back to his birth in 1759. I got some of this information, and the most crucial part of the information came from Carl Lovett out at Olive. And Carl arranged to obtain the Revolutionary War pension records of our ancestor, to whom nearly all of us in western Kentucky can trace our lineage. And it's kind of an interesting story. From the record that he tells of his Revolutionary War experiences.
Was he with Virginia?
He was with the 15th line of the Virginia Regiment, although he enlisted in Baltimore, Maryland in 1777. At that time, he was about, 20, maybe 21 years old.
Yes, sir.
He, I guess he was about 19 at that time. I don't know where he was born. We always thought that he came from Massachusetts, and we had some records of some Lovetts having migrated into Massachusetts from England, but I don't know where Joseph, and that was this fellow's name, I don't know where he was born. And he doesn't say in his pension record, which is on file over in Duliford County, North Carolina, is where we got it. He does give his age, of course, and something of his war experiences, and then how many children he had at the time he made his application for his pension.
I believe that's an English name.
It is an English name, and goes back quite a long way in English history. In fact, the name we can trace back as far as the Norman Conquest in 1066. There was a family legend at one time that our ancestor came from Portugal, but I take a rather dim view of that because first, Lovett is not a Portuguese name, and second, there having been so many Lovetts that came into New England from England, it's more likely that he came from England originally. Probably the answer to that is that shortly after 1700, the British government adopted a law prohibiting any further migration of England's to the colonies.
Mm-hmm.
And many people then left England on the pretext of going to another country,
Yes.
and then from there migrated to America. So it may be that he first went to Portugal and then migrated from there to America. We really don't know.
The Lovetts have been quite outstanding in American history, and Robert Lovett, I guess, was he the last one who held national office? Was Secretary of Defense?
Yes, that's Robert Moses Lovett from Texas. He
Mhm.
was the Secretary of Defense.
But now, likely, since so many Kentuckians went to Texas, of course, the history of America is moving west. Probably his ancestors came through Kentucky, I would imagine.
I really don't know about that. We have traced our history from the time Joseph Lovett, the ancestor who was in the Revolutionary War and fought in Brandywine and Germantown, and probably was at Valley Forge with Washington because he fought in the last major engagement before Washington went to Valley Forge, and in the first one after they came out. So we have to assume that he probably was there. But he was captured down in Charlestown, and at that time was serving under General Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
After he was captured, he says that he escaped and he went back to Guilford County in North Carolina, which, let's see, what city is Guilford County? I think I've got a record of it somewhere. Anyway, he went there and settled, and he got there at the age of 25, and then he started raising children, one of whom was a fellow named Moses Lovett.
Mm-hmm.
Moses and at least one of his brothers moved into Tennessee, and there they had a number of children, and then at least 2 or 3 of their children migrated into Kentucky in about 1846.
Just in time to come to Marshall County, which had been established in 1842.
Exactly, and they settled out at close to the Unity Church here in Olive, close to Olive.
My dad's old neighborhood.
So there they raised children. Of those, there was John Lovett, who was my ancestor. He had 2 sets of children, one of whom, you may recall, was the Lovett named John G. Lovett that was a Commonwealth attorney for many years in Marshall and McCracken County.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, my grandfather was John G. Lovett's half-brother.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, then my grandfather was George Newton Lovett, and then my father, of course, was H.H. Lovett.
All right. Now, you went to school here in Benton.
Yeah, I graduated here in Benton High School.
Were you about the era of Joe Creason?
I was 2 years ahead of Joe in high school. Although we were neighbors, we were born and reared within 3 doors of each other and played together all of our lives. Yes, he was in high school when I was. We were on the basketball team. We were substitutes on the basketball team at the same time. I was best man.
Do you remember any of your teachers?
Oh, yes. Miss Addie Vaughn taught English. Matt Sparkman taught mathematics and coached basketball. Waylon Rayburn taught history. I could remember quite a number of my teachers. Tellis Chambers at that time was superintendent here in Benton.
Superintendent. Judge Rayburn married a Benton girl and became a judge in Callaway County, I recall, and then later was one of the vice presidents of Woodmen of the World. I remember him quite well.
Yeah, Judge Rayburn married Mary Ely, and she was Will Ely's daughter. She was a brother to Joe Pete Ely, who used to work at the post office here.
Mm-hmm. Now, you finished Benton High. Where did you go to college? I think you did, because I know you attended law school at, was it Harvard?
I went to college at Western in Bowling Green and graduated there in '37, and then I went to Harvard in '37 and graduated from law school in 1940.
Probably the only attorney from Harvard in Marshall County, I would guess.
I think probably the only one that Marshall County's ever had, and it may be well that Marshall County's grateful for that. I don't know.
Well, so you picked up then what was then known as the Bachelor of Law, but they rearranged that now so that the Bachelor of Law, which was a 3-year program beyond the bachelor's degree, is now the Juris Doctor, is it not?
Yeah, they converted those degrees from the Bachelor of Law to Doctor of Law back several years ago.
But they still have the old Doctor of Jurisprudence, I believe,
Yes,
beyond the Masters and the...
Yes, the Doctor of Law. After that comes the Doctor of Jurisprudence, which is one more year of study.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, now they have combined the curricula up there so that you can go 4 years, combine the courses, and get your master's degree in business administration and your Doctor of Law
Mm-hmm.
in the same year. And my son was fortunate enough to do that.
That's certainly an excellent program. It really makes sense, doesn't it? Now, you've practiced for TVA for some years, have you? Some of their cases?
Yes, and right after I got out of law school, I worked for a while for the Federal Bureau of Investigation as a special agent.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went with TVA's law division, served there until I went into the Army. After my Army career, I returned to TVA and was practiced for them until 1952. Then after that, I came back to Marshall County on a consultant contract for TVA and represented TVA in all of their condemnation work in Western Kentucky and Western Tennessee for
Now you
20 years after that.
You've practiced before the Supreme Court.
Yes, sir.
How do you get to do that?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of luck involved in it, and having a case that is of sufficient importance that the Supreme Court will hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was involved in a very involved commerce case involving railroad and barge line freight rates. And this case, I was representing some clients in Alabama, and the case arose in Alabama, and went from there to the Circuit Court of Appeals and directly then to the Supreme Court.
Did it have anything to do with the way the North used to keep the South in economic subjection?
No, this was
shipping...
after that issue had been pretty well resolved. This was an effort by a railroad to reduce its rates on specified commodities so as to try to eliminate their barge line competition.
Mm-hmm.
An interesting story in connection with that, the case that I argued in the Supreme Court had as my opposing counsel Dean Atchison, the former Secretary of State.
Yeah.
So he and I had quite an argument in the Supreme Court.
Very good. That's something to be very proud of. Now, you've said something that makes me want to do a little backtracking. We've gotten you out of high school and out of college. You worked for the FBI a while, and then you mentioned the Army. Now, when was this, World War II?
Yes.
Well, tell us a little more about, were you drafted, or?
I was drafted. I volunteered for the Officers Corps and was rejected because of my physical disability, my eyes. I later ran my name back through the draft, and this time was accepted for the service. I entered the service in May of 1943,
Mm-hmm.
and stayed in about 2.5 years. I never did go overseas. I stayed in this country.
Mm-hmm. Were you with the Did they let you practice your skills as an attorney, the judge advocate general, or?
I did some, but not much. I started in the Army in the military police
Mm-hmm.
and stayed in the military police for about a year and a half or 2 years, and then I went into personnel, post headquarters in the officer personnel, and did some JAG work there in prosecution, but not in defense.
All right, and then after the war was ended, you returned, and when did you get married?
Got married in 1941. I graduated from law school in 40, and then we married in the...
And your wife was...
Lunell Cup, C-U-L-P. Her father was postmaster down at Gibbertsville.
Mm-hmm. I remember a Culp that played basketball at Murray that had the most beautiful one-hand shot that I had ever seen. His name was Durward, but everybody called him Red. He was red-headed. And he was the first fellow that I had seen that never missed much and shot with one hand. And I recall a coach that came to Murray named Rice Mountjoy, and he dedicated his year to stopping Red Culp from shooting a one-hand shot and Joe Fawkes from shooting a jump shot. The coach lasted 1 year. I think they would have been the greatest team in America if they'd turned them loose.
They probably would have. Red Cup, I knew him well. I know him well, and he was a great ball player. And of course, Joe Fawkes was one of the all-time Hall of Fame basketball players.
All right, now, you were married and you have children.
Yes, I have 2 children. I have a son who is now practicing law in Tallahassee, Florida, and my daughter is living in Murray, and she's teaching. Well, she's a counselor out at Callaway.
Mm-hmm.
And her husband is teaching and coaching at Murray High.
I see. Your son went to Western and then went to, well, he just kind of followed in his father's footsteps. Did he? And then he went
as a matter of
to
fact,
Harvard?
If he hadn't taken the extra year at Harvard, well, he would have graduated from high school, college, and law school, all being the same schools exactly 30 years after I did.
Now
he took an extra year.
He's in quite a good place for practice, I suppose. Is he interested in politics?
Not on his own behalf. He has a good friend of his who is one of his law school classmates that's a senator from South Dakota, and so he's been working with him in some of his presidential aspirations.
And in the capital of a state with as many people as Florida, 12 million? There should be a little politics going on around Tallahassee.
Well, they are obviously a large law firm in the capital city. Has an awful lot of government business before the government agencies, and they have to keep in tune with all of the politics that goes on. For example, Tuesday they just had the inaugural of their governor for the second term, Graham, and his law firm had quite a large reception that afternoon for all of the new officials who had been sworn in, the governor and all of his cabinet and so forth. So they have to maintain that rapport and relationship. And he does participate some in politics, but he's more involved right now in conducting law seminars and practicing law and in teaching law at Florida State University.
Tell us what you can remember about the Benton that you first remember. Some of the officials in the county. I know your dad, I think, was Commonwealth's attorney at one time.
Yes,
perhaps county attorney, the merchants around the square. Just what was Benton like when you were growing up?
Well, about the earliest I can remember, as far as the county officials are concerned, I think Bill Gibson was the county judge. I think he was followed, if I'm not mistaken, by Homer Rayburn. At that time, my father was county attorney, I believe. My father was county judge at one time. Maybe that's the first thing I remember. Maybe Bill Gibson followed him. I remember it was during the Prohibition days, and the thing that stands out in my mind was the time when my father would go on raids to try to capture whiskey stills all over the county. Particularly, they'd chase the people from between the rivers who'd come across the Tennessee in a boat to market their whiskey, and they'd chase them back across the river.
Yeah.
That I will remember. Sometimes they would confiscate automobiles. I remember one time my father brought a T-model Ford home that had been confiscated. It smelled like whiskey
Yeah.
all over, and we called it the Whiskey Dick.
Yeah. That's quite an interesting turn of affairs. What were some of the stores around the square in those days?
Well, of course, J.D. Peterson had his store up on the corner. There was the drugstore where Nelson's Rexall drugstore is now. I believe at that time that was being operated by Gus Ford, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, the one down on the corner was Albert Strow ran the drugstore down there. There was the Barnes store up where the Benton dress shop is now.
Mm-hmm.
Ferguson store down down on the corner down there was in operation. I remember the old hotel that was in operation.
Now that was sort of over toward the Bank of Marsh County now, in that general area, was it?
The old hotel was about where the across from the present Bank of Benton, where the Miller Johnson building is now.
Oh yes.
The one over by the Bank of Marshall County was the Riley Hotel, which came much later.
Yeah, well that's the first one that I recall.
Yeah. There was an old hotel across from where the Bank of Benton is now, and they used to bring passengers up by a wagon. The wagon would meet the train every time it came to the depot and bring the passengers up to the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
That much I can vaguely remember. I was just a kid in those days.
Do you remember any funny incidents that happened, particularly that you recall in your high school days, maybe, or stories that Creason used to tell when he told all those big tales? Did you recall any of them having occurred?
No, not very many. Joe had many contributors to his repertoire of stories, and most of them I didn't know. No, there are quite a lot of amusing. I remember when they first put the water and sewer line in Benton. I was just a kid in the grades, and we always walked to school from where I live. And when they were building the manholes along what is now Joe Creason Drive,
mm-hmm.
they had a bricklayer whom they had brought in here to lay the bricks for the manholes. And this bricklayer would get drunk every night, and the next morning he'd have to work 2 or 3 hours, as he would tell us, in order to sweat out the booze so he could do the job right. He was one of my heroes. I remember that Joe Creason's grandfather, Mr. Cross, had a job of taking his wagon and his team every morning, and he'd drive down to the depot and get the mail and bring it back to the post office where his son-in-law, Dine Prince, was the postmaster. Mm-hmm. So every day you'd get up and you'd see Mr. Cross driving his team down to the depot to get the mail.
Yeah.
Take it to the post office.
We might mention something about other children in your dad's family, dad and mother's family. I know you had a brother named Henry Harden.
Yes.
And he's deceased now.
Yeah, he died in 1968.
Were there other children?
Oh, yes. I have 4 sisters still living, and 3 of them are living here in Benton.
I remember one named Brooks Cross.
Yes.
That she is your sister, I think.
That's my sister. She was married to Joe Creason's uncle, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Grace Nelson, Pont Nelson's wife, is my sister. And Jane Bradley, Rob Bradley's wife, is my sister. And then I have a sister whose husband is now deceased, and she's living at Stanford, Kentucky. So there were 6 children, and 5 of us are still living.
All right, very good. Now, in the few minutes that we have remaining, do you recall your first train ride?
Yes, very well. My first train ride was when I came back from the Riverside Hospital in Paducah after I'd had an appendicitis operation. Dr. Washburn, who was practicing here at that time, and I guess was about the only doctor in town, rushed me to Paducah in the car over the country roads late one evening, at night, and I had an emergency appendectomy by, I believe the doctor was Dr. John Stone down there. But anyway, when I recovered from that, they put me on the train and brought me back from Paducah. That was my first train ride.
Mm-hmm.
My first airplane ride was one big singing day when they used to bring airplanes out of Paducah or someplace, and they would land on the pasture down below the railroad and take people up for airplane rides, charge $5. I never will forget. And Joe Cross Creason and I had been picking strawberries before big singing, and we'd saved up $5 apiece.
A lot of money then.
Oh, lots of money. And we went down there, and we took a plane ride. He and I were sitting in the front cockpit, and the pilot in the back cockpit of the biplane, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Flew around for a while. Thought it was the greatest experience we'd ever had, so when I told my father about it, he said, "Where did you get the money?" And I said, "Well, we've been picking strawberries, and we had it." And he said, "You spend it all?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "John, you'll never be worth a damn." And I think he was probably right.
Someone recently on one of these tapes was telling me that their father said to them, "A fool and his money are soon parted." And he said, that really got next to me. He said, I didn't like being called a fool. But there might have been a grain of truth in it.
Sure.
Of the old adage. All right, what do you think changed your life most in having grown up in Marshall County? You see anything that occurred in the way you were brought up, the culture here that either helped or you think hindered you?
Well, I have nothing but admiration, of course, for the people who were so influential in my life when I was growing up, and there were an awful large number of those outside of my own family. I'd have to say that Walter Prince, Lawrence Cooper had great influences on me, and then we had a number of ministers at our church who were important in my life. I must also say that I guess none had a more profound influence than Matt Sparkman when he was the teacher and coach at the high school here.
I hear his name mentioned very frequently and quite favorably by about everybody that I've heard.
Oh, he was a great fellow, and he was made a tremendous contribution to this town. We were awfully sorry to see him leave.
Matt, of course, is still living and looks as healthy as a horse over in Murray, and he still plays golf, and he comes to a lot of college events, which I'm sure you know.
Still the nicest fellow that ever lived, I guess.
Yeah. Clarice is right beside him, and they have matured gracefully and still lead a rather active life in the civic affairs of Murray and Callaway County. As you said, they left here. Well, is there anything you'd like to say as we close off? We've got about a minute and a half left.
No, I don't think so, unless you have something you want to ask me.
Well, I'll get one more in.
All right.
Since we're on radio in particular, you recall anything about the early days of radio? Did you did you build a ham set maybe, or?
No, sir, I was too young for that, but I do remember the first one I ever saw. I delivered the newspapers here in town for then the Paducah Evening Sun out of Paducah. And there was a fellow over on what is now West 11th Street. And I went in one evening and delivered his paper, and he opened the door and asked me to come in, and he was sitting in the corner with a headset on, and he told me he was listening to the radio. And that's the first one I ever saw.
Getting KDKA Pittsburgh.
I don't know what, but I do know that after that we used to go up to Albert Strauss drugstore on the corner, and he had one of these old Atwater Kent radios with a reverse speaker. I'm sure you've seen them.
Yes.
And I remember that it was there that I heard the first fight between Gene Tunney and Jack Dempsey. And I remember that it was there that I heard the first fight between Gene Tunney and Jack Dempsey on the radio.
Oh,
There at
that
Albert
was
Strauss drugstore.
one of the greatest of all time.
Yes, sir. That was some real fight, and it came in so dimly only the persons right next to the speaker could hear it.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have one man that would be right next to the speaker, and he would then rebroadcast it to everybody in the drugstore so they could hear what was going on.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming and being our guest in this statewide library production. John Clay Lovett, it's been a pleasure to speak with you. I'm Ray Mofield. We're doing this with being paid for by Shelby McCallum, who is depositing one of the tapes in the Marshall County Library System. One will go to the State Archives in Frankfort, and one to the Murray State University Pogue Oral History Collection. And that concludes our broadcast for today.